You have to actually do that. It has to be built in. It's very difficult to tack it on, because if you think about something as simple as leaderboards, if you add them in after the fact when the user behavior is already set, in games we call it the core loop, right? The thing that you do most often is already set, then changing that behavior is really hard. It's really hard. And so the challenge with gamification is it often feels tacked on because it is. And so really what you want to do is you want to build the new compulsion loops, those new core loops, very early on in the software. And if you've already shipped, then it's really all about the social framework and how you reward the behavior that you want.
Today, we are joined by Dan Barnes. Dan is an accomplished executive in the mobile gaming industry with over a decade of experience at companies such as Network, Natural Motion, Zynga, and Machine Zone. Throughout his career, he's consistently driven revenue growth, developed innovative technology platforms, generating over $1 billion in enterprise value. Over the course of the last decade, he's deployed over $1 billion in user acquisition, worked with world-class IP, and raised several rounds of VC funding. In this episode, Dan and I talk about company culture being critical to a business success, live operations in gaming boosting engagement and retention, applying gamification principles in industries beyond gaming, and the benefits of using automation and generation to extend the life of creative output. With that, here's Dan Barnes. Dan, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks for having me. It's great to be here.
Hey, I'm so excited to have you today. Dan is in the UK. We actually just saw each other about a week ago in the US, but we were unable to do this face to face. So here we are today through the magic of the internet and all of the pipes that make up the internet.
That's right. Yeah, I'm really glad to be here, man. Thanks for the invite, and I'm looking forward to this.
Cool. Well, I think there's so much to talk about in gaming. I mean, you've got background in companies that are outside of gaming, but you've done so much at scale, especially taking early stage gaming companies like Natural Motion before they got acquired by Zynga, like Machine Zone before everybody knew about them and they were spending $5 million a day on user acquisition and kind of blowing up all of the other spots. You scaled Network and got that to an exit. So you've kind of seen a lot from both early stage and when it's at massive scale and kind of how those changes kind of take place over time. And I think a lot of those learnings apply not just to gaming companies, they apply to kind of any company, but gaming is unique in that it has so many data points and it's fast moving, it's fairly low consideration. And so you just have a lot more stuff to work with. And so I want to kind of spend today talking about some of those elements. And maybe just as a starting point, on the premise of starting an early stage company, you've built and nurtured so many of these companies from such an early point. And I think consistently from what I've observed, really strong company cultures that have followed. I'm curious if there's any key elements in your opinion to, a thriving culture. And then how do you maintain that as the company grows from 10 people to 100 people to 1,000 people?
Yeah, I mean, the second half of that question is the really hard bit.
Yeah.
I think, it was really interesting being super early at Machine Zone and going through the cycles there where, the most important thing was taking an insight to an action in the shortest amount of time possible.
Mm-hmm.
We were at the bleeding edge of live operations before it was called that, and that was a super interesting ride and something that, we've talked about a lot. But ultimately, I think the shining light there, the thing that was super interesting was that there was a clear objective from the very top of the organization, and the insight to action, the reactivity, the ability to turn on a dime and be able to create something that engaged and delighted millions of players, and then allowed that delight to then flow into both engagement and revenue. And because that was the North Star, because that was the thing that was kind of like the single most important thing, everything flowed from that in a way that was kind of incredibly aligned. The way that the software was built, the way that the server infrastructure was built, the way that the company was built in terms of the team structure, in terms of the expectations and the objectives that were set, like everything was aligned, and that was kind of magical. And I think that's ultimately why Machine Zone won during that period, is because everything was so deeply integrated towards kind of a common objective. And then obviously the humans were amazing and they had first mover advantage, and there are a lot of other things that went to it.
On that point of insight to action in the shortest time possible, which I think is a great value and North Star, how do you manage the fact that, especially as you grow, where I'm just picturing like a 30-person company, one, how do we define insight and action? Because those can have different meanings. how do we know that an insight is worthy of action, right? So what tools do we use to measure that? And how do you prevent, like, I have an insight that is based on facts. 3 other people have insights that are based on facts. And we're working kind of siloed on actions that are maybe counterproductive.
I think there are 3 parts to that answer. I think the first one is, from a human standpoint, the people that are executing have to be intrinsically motivated.
Mm-hmm.
They have to be able to know the objective, know that they are the best human for the job, and simultaneously be able to execute. And that starts with hiring, right? I mean, you have to find those people from the very start, but you need humans who are intrinsically motivated. They don't require someone to tell them what to do. They know that's the right thing.
Yeah.
The second thing is you need unambiguous data and objectives. You need things that are clear, and like that context has to be super high across the organization in a way that everybody understands. If we fall to subjectivity, if we fall to those things, then ultimately, you get those clashes. You get those moments where this is my idea, this is your idea, and it's a question of opinions that win out. And so you need objectivity both in the data that informs those opinions, but also in the kind of objectives that you've set yourselves. You should be able to say, look, the most important thing is to lift D14 average session length by 20%, and then be able to say, okay, I know that that's the objective because that will result in a higher LTV, and as such, this is the thing that's going to create the highest chance of us executing against that, or the highest chance of us manifesting that outcome. And then lastly, and probably most importantly, you need an incredible system of prioritization. You need to be able to. We had this at Network. We use this thing called ABC 123. So I know there are a bunch of different prioritization matrices, and there are obviously you can shake a stick at probably 20 of them. But we would use something called ABC 123, which was what's things that we must do, should do, and could do. And then 123 was now, next, and later. And so you had A1s, which are must do now. And those things always rose to the top. And because you had intrinsically motivated humans who also knew their capabilities and their specializations, they could then kind of like take the A1s that they were most equipped for. And because they're intrinsically motivated, they don't need someone to help them do it. And then ultimately you have great humans focused on the right problems with unambiguous data. And I think when those 3 things kind of like sit together, is where you actually see the magic happen, where the culture empowers the outcomes instead of getting in the way of it. And ultimately then who does what isn't important, it's what gets done. And that's really how businesses, I think, thrive.
Well, I think the other thing I'd add to that I've observed in my own career, having worked at a bunch of companies with amazing cultures as well, is that because they're intrinsically motivated, they don't need other people to help them with it, and they can just go off and run with it. And I think the caveat I'd add is, and when they do need other people to help them, they'll raise their hand and ask for it.
Yeah, absolutely.
And they'll also go rally the troops and kind of get people on board with what they're doing. I think the biggest thing I've seen that is something that we really value, and something I've seen that has been insidious in other orgs, is suffering silently. And so it's like, well, don't suffer silently. And that gets back to somebody who's intrinsically motivated. It gets back to somebody who's kind of proactive by nature. And I think a guy who's amazing, guy named Bob Olson, had said a long time ago, earlier in my career, he's like, if you ever see somebody in the office walk past a gum wrapper and they like see it and they don't pick it up, you got to get rid of that person, because it's like the right people.
We did the same thing when we interviewed people. We would make sure that we would deliberately not pick up the glass of water when we left, and anyone who didn't take the glass of water back to the kitchen, we didn't hire.
Oh, interesting. So you would leave your own glass?
No, that we would offer them water. They would drink the water. They put it on the table, but we would not pick it up when we finished the interview.
I see.
And if they picked it up and took it to the kitchen, that meant that they weren't expecting somebody else to look after them or to tidy up after them, which means inherently it was like we had all these systems in place to test for intrinsic motivation, and that was really a really strong indicator of it. And we use that.
Or they at least ask like, hey, where should I put the glass? Right.
Exactly.
It's like, maybe.
Or should I pick this up?
Yeah. Like, where does this go? Yeah, that's interesting. This is Martin's.
It's funny on your point about the ability to ask. Google did this really big survey of what the number one indicator of high performing teams were, and it was psychological safety.
Safety.
Yeah, it was the ability to be wrong.
Yes.
Essentially, to make mistakes and to ask for help.
Yes.
And if they felt like they had a culture and a team, because they're very siloed in their teams, right? But if they had the ability to essentially ask for help and also make mistakes, their performance was inordinately higher than other teams.
I think the other thing too is that is tied up in that psychological safety is and it's part of that willingness to be wrong, but it is not an aversion to conflict. And conflict doesn't mean like, I'm right, you're wrong binary arguments. It's like, hey, here's a good example. I tell you I'm going to have you something by Thursday morning. It is Wednesday afternoon, and I know that's not going to happen for a variety of reasons. Instead of raising my hand and saying, hey, that's not going to get done, and here's when it will be done, and here are the steps I'm taking to do that. And by the way, later we can debrief on how that happened and make sure that the root cause of that doesn't like repeat. I just don't say anything because I'd rather just not deal with, I'm like, somebody else used this term, which is, it's like an allergy. What is it? It's like an allergy to criticism. And so you see this too manifest in the opposite of that psychological safety bit, where somebody, the slightest criticism, they're like, well, this and this and this, and they have this like really like 10-to-1 reaction to something. It's like eating something you're allergic to any form of criticism. And that is like, there's so much wrapped up in that. And like, you could armchair psychology that to death on like, why does somebody, we're trying to sell widgets here. Like, I'm not like, at the end of the day, we're going to go home and we have our own lives, and we'll come back to the widget factory. But I was just telling you that the machine needs oil, and you're like, I know it needs oil. Don't you think I know it needs? It's like, hold on. Whatever. So, okay. So those,
it's interesting that the radical candor piece is like, it's one of the really critical parts of that is that you can challenge directly. So you, but you must care deeply. So the idea that you care deeply about not only the human but the outcomes. So you're empathetic and sympathetic to the situation they find themselves in, while also having really high absolute standards. So you say like, look, this is the objective. This is where we need to get to. You don't use relative standards where you say, oh, well, we're better than yesterday. You say, oh, that's good, but this is where we're going, and that's the first step towards where we're going. So it's really important to have high absolute standards, and then you can challenge directly and both care deeply, and that's where I think all the success happens. And I really enjoy that framework, because if you just challenge directly without caring, it's the obnoxious aggression piece. And then if you don't challenge and do care deeply, you get kind of like stuck in this place where you don't talk, you don't bring up those things, you want to avoid conflict, and that's equally as poisonous. And so there's some magical bit in the middle where those things play out.
And the thing we talk about a lot here, and I've seen it elsewhere, is like, you have to care more about the baby than you do about credit and or fault, for that matter. And so, which means that, like, I always use the example, and maybe it's not a great analogy, but it's like, imagine we're in a home of 10 people, and we have a newborn set of twins. We're all in the same family, and you're the guy who gives the babies the milk, and I come along and I see that they're hungry, and that it's clear the milk is in the fridge. You have forgotten it, and you were busy, or you went to the store to go get something. And so I heat up the milk and I give it to the babies. And when you come home, any normal person would be like, oh my gosh, thank you so much. And like, I meant to call you and whatever, but like, thanks for taking care of that. And like, I'll clean up, and I might even do something for you later, because you kind of did my thing. What you see in corporate a lot, I mean, ideally you see that, but what you see in corporate a lot is somebody comes and says, hey, person who leads user acquisition, I had this idea for a test. Like, I saw this ad this weekend on TikTok, and it was for maybe a competitor of ours, or it was for something that was non-related, but I really like this and it got my attention. And like, do you think we could do something like that? And the person's like cross-armed, like, that is you don't know anything about UA. That's my job. What are you doing? Why don't you, like, while I'm at it, I got some ideas for you on lifecycle, because, I don't think that's really great. And the person's like, and it shuts it down.
I mean, ultimately, that's why I ended up leaving. A couple of the companies that I've been at, one of them we've worked at together, is because people cared more about who did what than what got done. It was more important of like, this is mine.
My
why would you? It's my.
Why are you here? It's like,
because I care.
This is
my house.
I'm here to help you. Like, these things work, you'll look better. Like, what are you talking about? And it's all about the baby.
I think and I think it's all about complementary intelligences, right? Like, I don't know everything. You don't know everything. There's some. And I think being open to new viewpoints and having complementary intelligences focused on problems is ultimately how you win. And so, being close to those things just makes everyone worse.
Well, it's something that we valued at Red Bull, which I've taken with me, which is they would look for in their people that they demonstrated being lifelong learners, is what they called it. But what you want is somebody who's like, oh, tell me all about it. Or they're like, their knee-jerk reaction. Actually, you can kind of even just gauge for this in the questions they ask you, which is like, oh, that's really interesting. I don't know anything about that thing you just mentioned. Could you tell me about that? How does that work? So there's like curiosity that's wrapped up in that. There's also a level of like humility and the kind of psychological safety that says like, yeah, I'm just a dude. Like nobody knows everything. Right. And so if I'm in front of a physicist, if I don't have any questions for them, I'm missing out an opportunity to learn versus somebody else who's just like,
I'm a 5-year-old.
I know what physics is. I can do that. Let me tell you all about me. And so, we've done this where it was a measure that we used at Red Bull as well. But in the interview process, we would just simply ask, like, what are you into outside of work? And at Red Bull, people think of that as like, oh, you need to be like a skydiver or some sort of like extreme sports person. Nope. You could just knit. You could be really into stamp collecting, things that are not extreme sports, Red Bull stuff. But just the fact that you have interests outside of work. I was talking with my wife about this, and they have a kind of a target where they're looking for, what is it? It's something it's essentially like a high appetite for like new stuff. They have like a better phrasing for it, but it's somebody who's just like, yeah, I'm really into this and I do this and I'm learning how to garden and I'm learning how to make sourdough and I'm learning how to do whatever, like you name it. And, or like, yeah, I'm taking like a circus school thing in San Francisco, which is a real thing, but it's like that desire to learn and experience, and a high tolerance for that, because that there are indicators of some of these other things that underlie that versus somebody who doesn't want to learn anything new. And I remember asking a person that we were interviewing, I'll spare the details of the role, but I asked him that question, what are you into outside of work? And he's like my dog, I guess. And I'm like, oh, okay. Like, do you take your dog to the dog park?
Crafts.
Do you go on hikes? Yeah. What do you do with your dog? And he's like, just walk. I'm like, oh, okay. Well, like, what else? He's like, that's kind of it. I'm like, you into travel or food? Like just softballs. Like who's not into travel and food? And he's like, not really. And he's like, just my dog and work. And I'm like, and on paper, this person was perfect for what we needed.
Yeah.
And I'm like, who wants to work with somebody who's into their dog and work? Like, that's the other thing, is they're kind of boring people if they just care about work and one other thing, kind of thing.
Yeah, that's right. And I mean, you and I talked about this when we talked about the network stuff, but like, putting humans together in a company is a bit like chemical compounds, know. And if you put 1 + 1, they can equal 11, or they can equal 3, or they can detract from each other.
Yes.
Because they don't have any bonds, they don't have any synergies, they don't have any commonalities, and they also have like personality abrasiveness. So there's a sociopath and an empath, or whatever it is, and so it's actually really important to not have those kinds of humans, the ones that are kind of energy suckers,
repellent, energy vampire.
Well, the vampires, the ones that kind of, it's like, it should be easy and fluid to create bonds with humans, because as you do that, kind of going through the trenches and going through the execution, ultimately the work just feels easier and gets done faster. And if you have too many of those detractors in the organization, it ends up being kind of like, calcifies,
Yes.
It gets to a point where it slows everything down.
Yeah, and it repels people who start to ask, like your best people start to ask, why am I here if that person's allowed to be here, right? And so it has these like longer term, if it depends on like how that's expressing itself, right? It's not just like a matter of like, oh, he's an introvert, I'm an extrovert kind of thing.
Yeah, and I, to be clear, I think everything should have balance. I'm sure that should exist, but I think like if you want the chemical compounds to kind of have the balance, and you should just make sure as you're building your teams or your companies, that you have the right mix, something that's not explosive, because you don't need you don't need that either, but also something that doesn't react at all is not great either. So you want to make sure that you have the optimal mix. And I think thinking about those things, there's nothing more important than the humans you have in your organization, and they're also the people that you have to take care of the most, and you have the most responsibility to. And and I think it's the hardest problem to unwind. And
for sure,
you want to make sure that you have that stemming from the from hiring all the way through the organization.
Yeah, and with each additional hire, you're creating a number of new relationships, right? So it's like exponential with every hire. I think I can't remember what it is, but it's like if you look, well, we could just do math on it, but you add like, you go from like 2 people, you essentially just have like one relationship. You have it kind of 2 directions, but it's kind of just my relationship with you, your relationship with me, 2 perspectives. And then you add a third, and now that has multiplied. You add a 5th and a 10th, and all of a sudden now it's like crazy interconnected. And yeah, super hard to untangle. And it's not, I think it gets back to the like hiring, slow firing fast kind of mentality. Any other stuff on the culture side that you think are kind of must-haves or gotchas or traps or things that, really should be accounted for early?
Yeah, I think we've covered a lot of it. I think clear objectives, intrinsically motivated humans, infrastructure that's set up to enable those people to do the best work of their life. The Steve Jobs quote of "We don't hire smart people and tell them what to do."
Yes.
Just to round out that last point, though, there's actually a theorem called Dunbar's theory, which is that essentially at groups of over 150. You can no longer maintain all of the relationships you need to have a society or a community live together. It's why troops of apes never get larger than 150, is because it breaks down. They basically bifurcate into other troops. The way that humans have got around that is you put the structure in place. So you have documentation, and you have LinkedIn, so you can remember who these humans are, and you have Slack, so you can remember the last time that you spoke to someone, because you can't physically hold that many relationships in your head. But it is a real challenge with culture as you get to around 150 people, and just winging it kind of falls apart. And you need to get to what the systems are.
And by that time too, like as much as you've done, hopefully the work that you've put in has resulted in the people making up the culture you had desired. But like the culture is whatever the culture is, not what's on the board, right? And so it's like you need to know where you're heading in order to hit that. But sometimes you might land there at 150 and you're like, we're not observing these things. We'd seen that there was an old, I don't think I'm speaking out of turn here, but there was a value at Zynga, which was like Zynga fast. And it became kind of a joke because at certain points in certain orgs, people did not move that fast. And it would be like, well, it took like 6 months to get the contract signed. Well, that's Zynga fast. And it became used against them. It was like weaponized as a joke, as a parody.
Yeah. One of the founders of Network, his name's Alan Yu. He's he's a wonderful human being. And he would always say that the culture is a garden to be tended.
Yes. Yeah. I agree with that.
It's something that you maintain as you grow, and each new human adds something new to it. And I think not being inflexible about those things is probably the last and singularly most important thing, is that it will update and it will move and it will shift and it will change. And it will become something you didn't imagine, and that's part of the process.
Cool. Great advice there. And another area you've spent a ton of time in is in LiveOps. And I think for people who are in gaming, they'll all know what that is. Maybe it's worth kind of calling out what that means at a high level, but you were kind of really intently focused on LiveOps well before the rest of the industry put so much emphasis on it. We saw it at bigger companies that were kind of ahead of the curve there. But curious, like maybe tell us, for listeners who don't know, like what is LiveOps, and then what are some of the key elements within that, and are there ways that might apply to non-gaming companies?
I think you'll probably have to stop me talking on this one.
Great.
So you just time me out, but so live operations is basically the idea that instead of deploying content once, you deploy content hundreds of times, thousands of times. And it really is tied very closely at the hip with the idea of a free-to-play business model, where you give something up for free, you provide that content for free, and then you regularly deploy content, and that content can be in the form of in games, it can be new characters, new stories, new events, new levels, new worlds. It can be any of those things, new features. And the idea is to deploy those things as often as makes sense in order to retain and engage people for the longest time possible. Games are unique in a couple of ways, but one is that they normally get better the more people that play them. And that's not true for other forms of media. And then the second part is that the best games in the world can retain people for decades. You have people still playing RuneScape today, and EVE Online. There's these franchises that really are forever franchises. They will last. I mean, Words with Friends was one of them. I think
World of Warcraft as well. Like
World of Warcraft. Like there's these games that just will be there forever. And the reason for that is because they grow and learn with the community, but also they can regularly deploy new things to keep it interesting and fun. And when you think about traditional media, a movie or a book or a TV show, there are some people that will go back and watch
I'm sure there's someone in the world that's watched Love Actually 1,000 times, but
so specific.
It's not,
I feel like you might know this person.
I don't know who that would be. But it's not the common behavior, and the reason why you pay up front for all of that stuff is because that's not the common behavior.
Mm-hmm.
You have to monetize them. You have to make money from one-time consumption, single consumption. And when you flip that thing on its head, the permutations of that become really, really interesting, right? Because you can make something free, which then increases your total addressable market, and you all of these things. And so we were at the birth of that Machine Zone. When I joined Machine Zone, we were actually called Admired. We had 2 dating apps on MySpace, Add Him and Add Her, and moved into mobile with the creation of the iPhone. And at the beginning, we did what everyone else did, and we made paid things, and it wasn't a big business. And then Apple allowed the ability to essentially sell apps within apps, which they later completely killed. But essentially, what you could do is you could give an app away for free, you could make another paid app, and you could put it in the screen, like on one of the screens. So you could give people a taste of the content, and then they could purchase a new app, and it would take them back to the App Store. They'd have to re-download, they'd have to purchase on the App Store and come back. So it was super janky. But that was really the beginning of free-to-play on mobile, at least. And we were with Neil Young, who was the co-founder of Network. He was also the founder of a company called NG Moco, and they had a game called Eliminate. And we were kind of like, this was right at the beginning back in the day. Those 2 games were kind of fighting it out. And then we had Original Gangsters and iNights, a bunch of other free-to-play games. And that LiveOps piece became critical paths as Apple suddenly released the ability to not just have apps within apps, but actually have new content deployment, new kind of new ability to deploy new things to players, so new levels. And that was really the first thing we ever did, was release a game with 100 levels, and then we'd batch the next 10 and the next 10 and the next 10, or next 50 and next 50. And every time we did that, we see this huge engagement spike, and also people would come back for that moment, right? Because there would be this kind of community swell that would happen there. And then it suddenly became about what the best thing to deploy was, like what's the best piece of content to both engage and acquire new customers. And so data became super important. Suddenly we're not just caring about, well, how many downloads did we get of the first app and how many purchases did we get of the app we've planted in the back, but suddenly we're talking about, well, if we did this and we did this, what's the engagement spike, and so our entire lexicon shifted, towards KPIs that now are kind of commonplace, like engagement and retention, sessions, and all the other things that we talk about. And as we're going through this, we suddenly work out that we can make people pay for those things. And Japan is 7 to 10 years in the future on pretty much anything that's gaming related. And so they had been doing this on feature phones for a long time, but gacha came into play, and essentially forced rarity was then something that you could play with. And that was really the heyday for Machine Zone, was the ability to essentially have a gacha at the center of customer purchases, and then celebrating that through social frameworks that made people kind of like have FOMO about the things that were the most rare, and tie them into social situations that gave real value to the things that you sell.
And for people who don't know, gacha is essentially, if you've ever played a game and you come back and you open up a chest and it has something inside, it like wiggles and then it pops and you have coins or some new life or whatever. Or if you go all the way back just to simple machines where you put a quarter in and you turn it and something spits out and it's got like a little sticky slap thing or a character or whatever. That is essentially the gacha mechanic that you see all over gaming that ties back to Japan.
It's so funny because so it comes from gashapon, right? Which is the Japanese. It's those machines, like you say, with the balls in them that have, like, you don't know what's in it. You put the quarter in, you turn it, and what do you get? That moment. And then there's some that are super rare and some that are more common. One just opened, a Bandai Namco gashapon store just opened in Ealing Broadway, like just down the road from me.
Oh, really?
Yeah, unbelievable. I can so yeah, it's like a physical gashapon store has entered the.
I've never been to one. So London. Yeah, next time I come to London, I'll check it out.
Come to London, or you just go to Japan. It'd probably be much more fun. Yeah. So then it became about data. It became about that insight to action piece. It became about what's the content that you deploy. How do you amplify that with the social frameworks? And really, then it became about what's the technology set that you have to be able to deploy these things, and how do you process incredible amounts of data, And then back to the prioritization stuff we were talking about. Like, if we wanted to sell umbrellas, we could quite literally make it rain. in the game,
Mm-hmm.
and so we would create these moments, these situational moments where it's like, oh, now this is really important.
Mm-hmm.
And then you could distribute, you would have new distribution methods to be able to kind of like sell those to the player base or engage them over a long period of time. Mm-hmm. And so then it was about, well, what can you create? And ultimately then the sky is the limit. And it's funny, we when we were at Zynga, I don't know if you remember this, but so Don Matrick was the CEO when we got bought by Naturalmation. And Don had a friend called John Levin, who is now the Dean of Stanford. And he was the Dean of Economics at Stanford. And he came in a few times to Zynga to talk to us about the difference between real world economies and freemium economies, where things are free and and I honestly think we spent more time not teaching, but educating him about what was possible than he did us, because we had no constraints.
Right.
It's like, and we could come up with an idea, we could make the asset, deploy it within 30 minutes.
You have digital cows with digital grain.
And if you wanted to make something more valuable, you could just change the world.
Yeah.
You didn't even need to change the price. You keep the price the same.
Right. You can change how it's consumed. You can change okay, it runs out faster. Like there's a million levers. Yeah.
Or literally just make it really hot in the game so the cows need water.
Right.
I mean, it's you can do pretty much anything. Or you could, in CSR2, you could make it so that the entrance criteria was that you had to have a Ford Fiesta. Least bought car in the game is now most bought car in the game.
Mm-hmm.
Because the reward for the Fiesta Cup was a Ferrari GTB, and so in order to get the Ferrari, I need the Fiesta. Okay, now I need to go find the Fiesta, and so there were all these kind of like incredible moments that you could create, which would just like, it just results in just incredible engagement and retention over time, which is just the golden metric for free to play games. And
I'm curious, any thoughts on how that can apply? Because you mentioned, you can literally make it rain in the game and sell umbrellas. Like, are there lessons and learnings to be had from what we know about LiveOps that could apply to B2B companies or to more standard consumer products?
Yeah, I think that the thing is, like, humans are the same wherever they spend time, and humans care about pretty consistent things. They care about what other people think of them, how they're valued in a social framework. They care about their progression, right? Whether it's Duolingo, learning how to learn a language, or how many tickets I've closed in Jira.
Mm-hmm.
Humans care about
progression,
and they care about social standing.
Achievement.
They care about how they and then how they're rewarded for those things and how they visualize them. And I think a lot of the things that we put into games are deeply applicable to other pieces, and that's where this whole gamification rise has come from, right? I think the challenge for most of those pieces of software is that in order to really effectively live operate software, you kind of have to think about doing that from the very onset. You have to actually do that
It
has to be built in. You can't. It's very difficult to tack it on because if you think about something as simple as leaderboards, if you add them in after the fact when the user behavior is already set, where in games we call it the core loop, right? The thing that you do most often is already set. Then changing that behavior is really hard. It's really hard, and so the challenge with gamification is it often feels tacked on because it is.
Yeah.
And so really what you want to do is you want to build the new compulsion loops, those new core loops, very early on in the software. And if you've already shipped, then it's really all about the social framework and how you reward the behavior that you want. But there are systems, those systems are applicable, like I said, to any piece of software.
Well, and you see it a lot in SaaS products, in many products, but you see it a lot in onboarding flows. So somebody's saying, you do this, but I think an example that comes to my mind in the real world is LinkedIn. And they're like, hey, your profile is 65% complete. Yeah. And in order to get it considered 100% complete, you need to add a video and you need to link to an article. I don't know, but it's got like some series of things that need to be done. And we talk about this a lot in the UI UX world of like jobs to be done is like, okay, I have paid to enter the garden. I'm here now. What do I do? What do I do first? How do you reveal that to me in a world where you may have a really complicated product like Jira? It's like, let's create our first ticket. And then it's like, bling, like congrats, you got first ticket award. And someone's like, oh, okay. And like, you've bite-sized this for me versus just turning me loose into the world. That's becoming more and more commonplace. But I see it less like outside of onboarding and first-time user experience.
Well, I actually think the top voice system in LinkedIn is an equally good example. Like, if you're active on LinkedIn, so what LinkedIn want are for people to post,
sure.
and for those posts to engage with people and for that content to be vibrant, and then for other people to read it and find value, and then they retain, and that's a positive loop, right? And if you post often and you post that has good conversion metrics according to LinkedIn's algorithm, LinkedIn will reward you with essentially a POAP, like a badge that says you're a top voice in gaming or whatever it is, and then you can lose that. So if you don't keep doing it, if you don't keep it, and it's an almost perfect example of a gamification of a system, because they know what they want the humans that interact with LinkedIn to do. And they have set up a system that rewards that behavior and then socially celebrates and rewards the behavior that they've talked about. And those systems exist, everywhere. And so the question for me would be, well, what if they put a leaderboard into LinkedIn that showed you the top 10 top voices for each industry? So now I'm not just fighting against the LinkedIn algorithm. I'm competing against the other 9 best people.
Well, and if it showed publicly to anybody who wanted to go see it, the top 10, but it showed me that I was number 142, and I know like what's that delta? I'm not on a public list, but I'm like, ooh, or I'm number 11.
Yeah, I know how to get there.
It's like, oh, okay, like I'm super incentivized to go from 20th to 10th because now I'll be publicly acknowledged for whatever the heck that's worth. But like,
exactly. And then imagine that you could get your followers to help you.
Sure.
I mean, these things get a bit spammy, right?
Yeah,
so that's the problem, is then you're basically trying to hack it by fake engagement, and so there's some balance there to be struck.
And that speaks to the general economy and some of these live ops and just like when you start to move it, people will, to that same point as before, people are also natural kind of like min-maxers, or like, how do I game this? How do I like, and so then all of a sudden you're like, oh, okay. I mean, this is Google search from day one, where people are like stuffing keywords in SEO and all this other stuff. And like Google wants the most relevant first, like top page results. And so, but people see like, oh, this made me move the rankings. Google's like, we didn't think that through. And so you kind of need the humans to show you where you were weak. And then LiveOps gives you the opportunity to say, oop, we overcorrected or undercorrected that. Now we're going to like shift. We're just going to delete the Fiesta. And it's like, oh, okay, that goes away. Like, okay.
It's funny. I think it's where games are most ahead, is in the kind of the thought behind what different behaviors the player archetypes have inside the game, and then what systems design they're going to use to either encourage or move those behaviors. It's a real science. It's the Bartles, the Bartles 4. It was like, it's a thing that's existed for over a decade, and essentially this guy created a matrix of 4 different player archetypes. There was a killer, achiever, socializer, and explorer. And they said, look, every player in the world fits into one of these 4 archetypes. And
I can see that, by the way. I can see all of those in Red Dead Redemption. Like, there's a clear path. There's a clear path for all 4 of those.
That's exactly right.
Yeah.
And so and games inherently, we just do this, is that we think about those different player archetypes, we think about what their behavior and their kind of like unique spin on the core loop is, and then we create systems and environmental moments to reinforce those things, to make people feel delighted, and for me, delight is very specifically exceeding expectations. I think like delight has a very specific meaning to me, which is you exceed someone's expectations, and so we think deeply about that. That doesn't happen as often in other industries. Where you're classifying player types and then building systems in order to do that. You kind of have like this one fits all funnel, and then you're trying to just get people as far along the funnel as possible. And so I think that degree of thought can also be deeply applied to a SaaS product, or to a, it's like, what's your ICP, what's your idealized customer profile, but then what's the nuance within that of the top 3 other profiles that still value to you, and then how do you make sure that you have the systems design and the UI and UX and the pricing strategies and all of the other things that kind of like encourage the behaviors that you ultimately want.
I think the premise of the companies can be asking themselves, what is our version? In some cases, not all products are going to be like this, but what is our version of the Bartles for our product? So you think about something. Let's use Jira again. You have okay, I'm a taskmaster and I'm trying to do that, or I'm this manager who wants to kind of understand the broader system and intricacies there, or I am whatever. And we were just recently having a conversation with a large company. I think they're $1 billion company, but and we were talking about essentially segmentation as it relates to this, like the jobs to be done, and what are their desires and motivations of these various people and various customers. And the knee-jerk reaction was was the other side thinking about segmentation from
the sales,
female 35 to 55, and they do these. And I think their position was, hey, we don't think that that's very valuable as it relates to thinking about our customers in these chunky bits, because Facebook can just do such a good job of finding these people that we don't need it. And I'm like, well, that's for targeting. But then once they get here,
100%.
So there is a world where if we look at a certain thing, let's say prenatal vitamins, and we go and we look at it and we're like, well, they're all pregnant women or women that believe they're pregnant. There are very few men that are taking prenatal vitamins, I would guess. And so, sure, Facebook may be able to figure that out and divine it pretty quickly, but we already know that. And so, if nothing else, you might actually use that to just go direct, because I don't think we always want to be letting Facebook do full optimization there from a paid perspective. But ultimately, it's really about what are they hoping to achieve? How are we observing that? How do we decide whether or not they're in that kind of explorer killer path, and having those signals from the product to tell us what we think what they actually care about based on their actions.
Yeah, it's who are the amplifiers who talk about it externally? We have influencers and referral programs and these other things that exist, but thinking deeply about how your product encourages those things is a really interesting vector for me. You turn your customers into a sales force is kind of critical part. It's a way that a lot of things break out into new IPs, right? New kind of new brands. And I think there's also repeat. The people that repeat do this for past 9 months, and why? There's probably a bunch of people that are different, that are underneath the pregnant banner, that you could spend a lot of time thinking about what do you want to do in terms of the packaging, the messaging, yes, of course, the marketing, but also other pieces that correspond to where your players are. It's obviously much harder in a hardware or in a packaged goods universe than it is in a digital universe, because obviously in a digital universe you can change you can change whatever you want, and you can create different versions of that product. In packaged goods it's obviously much harder, but I do think that it still applies, in the idea of, well, maybe your ICP is more nuanced than this pregnant lady.
Yeah, and some people are going to have one kind of straight down the pipe use case. It's a brush to clean dishes. That's what it does. And sure, somebody might use it to clean their tires, but do we really care about that? Are we going to show somebody scrubbing the brush on their wheel in our advertising? Probably not. But oftentimes, especially with software, there are a number of motivators, or with even a physical, not a physical, but a service-based business. There's lots of reasons people are coming to you for different things and what they hope to get out of it. One other area that you were also ahead of the curve on is in automation and generative tools. I think, I remember talking with you pretty deeply back in probably 2018 about an internal tool for creative production that you guys were building and had already launched and were using and optimizing. I'm curious to hear your thoughts now, 6 years later, with the kind of shifting landscape in Gen AI and the ways that it kind of will or maybe should be applied to the first cohort of businesses kind of in this new era, and any mistakes you made early or lessons that you learned. But, I think that's a whole area to unpack that I think you've had a long perspective on.
Yeah. So we built a game called Legendary, Game of Heroes. It did $250 million a year at peak, and it was a puzzle RPG. And then we lost the fight to Empires and Puzzles and then broke it. That's a story for another day. But we had essentially, as we had built Legendary, we had left a technology platform in our wake. right? So we had all the things we needed to live operate and to acquire customers for. We had left all those things in our wake in this set of microservice architectures that could do, lots of very cool things, data infrastructure and analytics, identification, but also things like the user acquisition piece, and a segment of that about 2018 we carved out into something called the network scale platform, which was essentially a third-party publishing business, and we put other people on top of those tools and technologies, and we ran that business for a while, and that was ultimately what got bought by Forte. But one of the really interesting things there was we had focused a lot on performance marketing, right? It was where I came from, where obviously where you came from, and we spent a lot of time thinking about what are the things that we needed on top of Facebook Ad Manager or whatever it was to be able to create those things. And there were two really big gaps. One was what we called Brewster, which was essentially algorithmic dollar deployment across all places instead of just within Facebook. So it would match Facebook against Google and AppLovin and Unity and all the other places you could, and we had our own DSP. And so it would then do dollar deployment based on forecast return curves across all of those things. It sat across it on a meta layer. And the other thing was creative. Along with Eric, who we built something called Draper, which was essentially a creative optimization tool, and it made new creative. So you could basically say, we understand that this purple dragon plus yellow button is doing well on Facebook. Let's make red dragon plus yellow button, blue dragon plus yellow button, quickly iterate through all those things, and then do purple dragon plus green button, purple dragon plus, and we could change any of these. We had these templates that we made. They could be video or static, and then we could create very quickly new versions of those by essentially bulk uploading a bunch of PSD assets. It would then make those things dynamically, kick them out, and then we'd auto optimize towards the best by using Brewster at the top level to then deploy those dollars. And we were doing this all. We built this tool in, like you said, a long time ago. I wish we had Gen AI capabilities at that time, because obviously the quality of the assets and the quality of changes we can make were nowhere near what they are today. But I think the main learnings we garnered from that were creating new things is still really hard. Like, iteration essentially increases the creative's lifetime. So it meant that, because essentially what happens is, as you show these impressions, you get impression fatigue. So people have seen that ad, and the chances that they're going to click on the ad decrease after like the third to fifth impression. So you show it 1, 2, 3 times, and then after that, the chances that they convert on that ad decrease over time. And obviously it's not a hard and fast rule, but in that ballpark. And so by keeping the format and the targeting, but changing some of the assets, you could actually extend that creative's life cycle, considerably. But all that did was buy you time to find the new concept, and
the next concept.
It still turns out that like finding the new thing is still really, really hard. It's like really hard. And the Gen AI stuff doesn't actually help with that. The creation is still really difficult. And so extending creative's lifetimes is really important. Obviously decreases it basically mitigates the rate at which your eCPI rises, because it keeps eCPM flat, right? So essentially that's but it doesn't make it easier to create things. And so that's the first thing. I think the second thing is the number of dollars you need to deploy to actually have this be valuable at scale is just insane. It's so much money. It's you have to be spending
300
big,
mil.
But $250,000 a day. And in that case, it's a great thing to have.
Yeah,
because that's right, exactly right.
Well, your fatigue is so high at that rate too, right? It's actually a challenge. We were spending $1 million a day, and I worked with our teams to develop we called it Octopus internally, but it was there to predict creative fatigue in advance and stop off the campaigns faster than a human could, to say, okay, like we've seen enough of this diminishing return. We understand our frequency caps. We understand like where this is at. And so we're going to like pause that, launch the next best thing in our creative like backlog. And there might be 100 things that could get ripped and put in place. But that also like you still need to, this is solving the problem for like what gets in that creative backlog. Then there's the additional problem of how do we spot fatigue before a human can, And so anyways, like these are scale problems though.
That was what Brewster was designed to do. Was basically it would detect creative fatigue and then switch campaigns off because it would see the rise.
And Brewster is also deciding, hey, actually we're going to shift budgets from here to here because it's more performant. So there's like a twofold thing there.
Because it's more performant. Yeah. So those two things combined were really good. And I think those two things, creation is really hard and the scale of dollars is really high. And so they're kind of scale problems,
We've seen this too, where like I'm speaking with somebody, I guess I'll keep it anonymous, but they're spending a lot, $1 million a day and kind of scale, and they're getting pushback from leadership on creative production costs. And it's like, you can hire certainly 5 to 10 creatives full time for $1 million a year. And you're spending, it's like 1/365th of your budget. Like, and it increases the value. So like the analogy I'd used with that is like, we have this Ferrari and we're just going to put 87 octane in it because we can save a little bit of money. And then you're like, are you kidding me? 93 octane, that's another 30 cents. And it's like, do you know what you're killing on the other end of this though? Like you were torching money at the top because you don't, this is like classic penny wise, pound foolish.
Penny wise, but yeah, exactly that. I mean, that's what I was going to say is, it's, and I think UA is always the first place that you go to for like performance marketing is the first place you go to for penny wise and pound foolish thoughts because like, you kind of intellectually understand the idea of positive reinforcement loops, like what leadership often do, but objectively, when the scale of dollars they're talking about is there, they'll try and scrape whatever they can.
It's like, what if we can get 30 million back?
Yeah.
Like that's
And I think and it's a lagging indicator that it breaks.
Right.
So it always feels like a validated decision in the moment because you're like, oh, well, nothing. Wait, we saved $1 million off this $365 million budget and nothing changed. Awesome.
Right. Nothing yet.
And then 3 months later, you're like, why is our ECPM doubled? It's like, well,
Well, and I think, back when I would meet with teams who wanted me to come lead acquisition or something, I would always ask, one of the earliest interview questions I would ask, and I would ask it often, especially the more senior the interview was internally, especially if I was meeting with a CFO or somebody, I would ask everybody, do you think the organization views user acquisition as a cost function or a revenue function? And if you heard cost more than once, it's like, okay, we can't be successful there because it's like, versus somebody, the other question is like, I've talked about it a lot where it's like, most people would say like, oh yeah, I worked at King and managed 350 million a year in spend. The reality is like I managed 450 million a year in revenue, right? So it's like, well, how much do you want to make?
Yeah, exactly.
So not how much do you want to spend. So if somebody says, okay, we want to reduce our media spend from 350 to 100, it's like, you might as well just say we want to reduce our revenue from 450 to 150. And it's like, oh, okay, well, I guess we're foregoing revenues for some reason.
Yeah, it was that big thing at Zynga when we got there, which was like you talk to the product guys and they're like, those users that marketing are driving just like really low quality. Like we can't hit our revenue targets. And you go talk to marketing and they're like, the retention on that product is just not good enough. Like we can't acquire profitably for this. I think every company that has ever, I think your chances at failure are exponentially higher if you don't have product and marketing aligned. Like sat 100%. In the same boat, going in the same direction.
Thinking about the same baby.
Thinking about the same baby. That's right. Exactly right.
Yeah, because, well, and you add in a lot of, especially enterprise SaaS, but in a lot of other companies, you add in sales to that mix. And so you have sales saying, well, if marketing would get us better leads, we would close more deals. And then marketing says, if product would get us more feature parity with our competitors, we would be able to better market and get attention, but so-and-so competitor has a way better offer than we do. And product needs to go build the product. And then product says, well, if sales would sell more, we'd have the money to go build those product features. And it's this like vicious cycle of everybody pointing to the left and right. And meanwhile, shareholders or the CEO or others are like, why aren't you guys all just trying to solve this?
Yeah, well, that's and it comes back to the first thing we talked about, which is like, what's the company culture that enforces the behavior you want, not the behavior that humans inherit. Like humans are inherently territorial, right? They're kind of like, this is mine, this is my island of space.
Self-protecting.
And it's, and that is just like genetically, that's how we're coded up, that we want to protect our own feel better at home than we do anywhere else.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that all the things we talked about at the beginning, they come down to these actual moments, which is like, well, how does the company culture manifest the outcomes that you want in terms of everyone being aligned, intrinsically motivated to execute against the objectives, and be incentivized and rewarded for the execution that they have. And if you can answer those questions, then these things don't become a problem, and if they do, you've hired the wrong people or you've put the wrong systems in place.
Yeah. Well, and I think that, to the, I think people can ask the same question when you think about growth generally, as far as like kind of every function of the business. Something we talk a lot about is growth being a philosophy, not a function. So you can't, if you're saying like, well, let me go ask my growth guy what's going on there.
Yeah.
And like, that's the person, then you're already losing. Like the whole premise is lost on some level. And so, but it's like, where are the opportunities for these tools like Bruce or Draper, or tools that are externally available that make your legal teams faster in red lines against competitors, that make your finance teams faster at collecting and paying or delaying payment for that matter. All of these various areas where technology can be applied to streamline or like more rapidly iterate and test in product or in sales or whatever, versus just some singular point of failure at the upper part of the funnel that says, well, let's just put all the energy right there. When in reality, like the bucket underneath it matters as much as the water going into it.
Yeah, I think it's all about friction. It's all about, because there's a finite amount of energy that you can put into winning, right? Into creating something incredible, and creating something incredible is really hard. And so any place where you have inherent friction between where you are and where you want to be, it just makes everything harder, and those things compound really quickly, and you get to organizations that calcify very quickly. And so it's your point is like, look, how do you make sure that legal are in, they have all the systems in place to turn on a dime with the best possible outcome, because their objective is not the best lawyer speak, but it is the best legalese, but it is actually empowering the human who needs their support to go and execute against their mission so the company can be successful. And I think like that subservient culture, it's like subservient leadership is really important, but just a culture where you're trying to empower everyone else as often as possible is just really important, and that just reduces inherent friction. And the companies that, that's the challenge with that is scale, because like as you get bigger, you have to rely more on process and more, but I think the major mistake people make is I respect process a lot, but it has to be lightweight but incredibly rigid. It has to be very clear what it is, but very easy to use. And when you have people whose sole job is to manage the process, you have ultimately failed. Like that is my general read on these things is, if you have a PM that manages the process that's like driving the outcomes, you need to take you just check yourself. Just go and have a look at that, because those processes should not become projects in and of themselves. They are built to empower execution. It's really interesting. At Network, we decided not to have a central technology group. Obviously you have these like central games technology, CGT, or whatever it is, and it's just they're completely diametrically opposed in terms of what they're trying to do to what the games teams are trying to do, because the central games technology group are trying to ship perfect code, like because their outcome is actually the best possible platform. It's not delighting end users, it's like, here's a piece of technology that's great. And games teams just want to ship games. They just want to get it out into the hands of their customers. And so you have these two organizations that fight against each other, where one's trying to make perfect code, and perfect is the enemy of good. And then you have people who just want to ship things, and their timeline gets docked to the timeline of the central technology group. And so we decided to essentially have the technologies all be in like a central melting pot, where people could pull them out, iterate on them, and then put them back in, and that would then improve life for everybody. So Legendary had built this system called the VIP system. It was essentially Amazon Prime for games. It was actually built by one of the client engineers at Network, which is proof that the culture is great, is that an engineer PM'd and built the one of the things that generated maybe 15 to 20% of all the revenue on Legendary. And when he did that, his name's Shu, when he did that, he took that out, he built the ability to have subscriptions inside of the software, because one of our assumptions in the data was that you had to be in the software to be able to make a purchase, because that was a really easy way for us to counter hacking. Because if you were on BlueStacks or something, you weren't in the software, you didn't register as a client, and so because of that, we would kind of refuse the payments, or we would not recognize the revenue of the payments. But suddenly with subscriptions, you could be on holiday in the Bahamas and your subscription payment would go through. You're not in the software. And so we had to build all the infrastructure to be able to kind of recognize payments outside through subscription models. And the minute that Shu did that for Legendary, it then became available to every other game. So immediately all the other games could go and build those things. We didn't have a central technology team that built that. It was like the game had a need. It improved upon the systems that did that. So it was the system was called Alfred because it managed all the money. It's Batman's butler. We called all of our central services after butlers. And Alfred then was improved, and then every other game that we were building could then just immediately use that improvement that we put in. And what it meant was like the games were responsible for writing great code, improving the systems, and it was on a needs basis. But we didn't have any central technology group that owned that. And I think, you know, those things where there's risk of like diametric opposition of incentives and objectives, again, you just want to avoid those things like the plague, you know, as much as you can.
Well, one last question for you, and it's very gaming specific, but you know, the gaming industry generally has seen, you know, pretty significant shifts in distribution models over the years. I'm curious, like, how have you seen companies, or how have you yourself adapted to these changes? And then, you know, what do you think the future of game distribution looks like as we sit here today?
Yeah, it's something I think about a lot at the moment. You know, Machine Zone, we had server-to-server integration. We were plugged into everybody. You know, we literally had APIs and plugs there to everybody, and then we moved into kind of like attribution, and we had this beautiful era of just full data. You know, we had user-level information about everything, and because of that, we could basically shotgun approach everything. And then just pick the two things that worked and then rinse and repeat those things until there was no more left. And it was incredibly data oriented, and that meant that, you know, all the ads on mobile sucked. You know, they all sucked. And with the privacy era, I think, you know, that the method that we used to use to go and find users has gone away, and distribution is fundamentally broken for games. I think the number of games that are on the app stores is about the same as it's ever been. The number of games released every week is about the same, but the number of successful games is significantly down. And that's mostly because finding players is almost impossible now. You're either an old IP like Call of Duty, or you use Monopoly, right? Or you're lucky, like Helldivers or Palworld. And I just hope is not a strategy, and luck is not a strategy. And so I think there's a new way to not just think about distribution, but actually to think about games. You know, like I believe that I see a lot of these things about the everywhere game, you know, like a game that meets the audience where they are, irrespective of the platform or the medium. And I think, you know, gaming is going to evolve from, it already went from single platform to cross platform. I think the next logical step is for it to go to ubiquity, where you can have meaningful and deep interactions with games irrespective of the medium that you find yourself on. You could make progress via text, you know, or find a clue with an audio on a podcast, you know, or and I think that world is moving. And it's funny because gaming has tried this before. You know, there were a couple of games back in the day, Majestic, made by EA.
I remember that one. I was a part of that in 2001, early 2001.
Yeah, that's right, 2000.
It was crazy. This was, for anybody who doesn't know about Majestic, it was like, this is pre-iPhone. You get texts, you get phone calls. You're basically like a international spy. You've been like looped into something, and I think the whole premise of it is like at some point you're supposed to question whether or not this is like a game anymore, or if you actually are a thing. And you'd get these like phone calls that were like, all right, I need you to listen to me, this and this and this. But it was like pre-recorded, if my memory serves. But I remember thinking like, you could do that with voice actors. Like you could just do that with, well, now you could do it with something like 11 Labs in a way that is, and with AI in a way that actually is super interactive, where it's like, hey, listen, like, yeah, I know you got a ton of questions right now. Like, listen, just shut up for 3 seconds. I need you to go to the corner of this place, or go to this very specific place in Austin, which is where I was at the time. and go to the Capitol building and there's a QR code. I want you to scan that. And that QR code could exist in real life.
Yeah.
And you're like, okay, I'm going to do that like tomorrow or something. Or it's like, hey, I know you haven't scanned the QR code. You're getting texts like, did you go to the Capitol building?
I think, everyone didn't have a phone in their pocket. The internet wasn't as fast as it is now. Content creation tools were much more difficult to make. AI didn't exist for like generative kind of scripts and storylines.
We were on like 56K modems. Like,
and yet,
seriously. Like,
and yet it broke the fourth wall for a lot of people.
Yes.
It took people from, it blurred the lines between kind of like a game and the real world. And in doing so, it meant that it could meet people wherever they were. And I think there's a huge opportunity to go revisit that with the technological advances that we've made right now, and really kind of like question what actually is a game. I think the budgets for AAA games are just getting ridiculous. The hit rates of things are getting lower. The risk of making a game today is higher than I think
it's higher than ever
it's ever been.
Especially for a studio that doesn't already have a billion records.
Exactly.
Like you don't have like a first party audience. You're just like kind of coming out cold from the garage.
Even if you do, Microsoft just proved that doesn't matter. Yeah. They shut down studios that have just released games that were objectively successful. And I think gaming needs to rethink what an interactive experience is, and then through that lens, what the optimal distribution is for that. And that's where I'm most interested at spending my time right now, is rethinking from the very beginning, like similar to the way that we talked about live operations being hard because they feel tacked on, right? They feel like after the fact. I think building games built inherently to be distributed, so to be amplified by their customers, the same way that the Beast was amplified by the Microsoft community, what they called cloud breakers, at the same time as Majestic. How do you get your customers to become a sales force? How do you get your players to be so engaged that they want to share externally? But
think
also,
Pokemon
how do you make
Go?
Sure right. Exactly. But how do you make sure that content lives on the internet in a way where it is absolutely zero friction to have deep and meaningful interactions with them? And I think there's this confluence of like the technology coming, the real serious challenge that the gaming industry is going through right now, and I think it will birth a new type of interactive experience, which just further blurs the line between traditional media and interactive media, and that is ubiquitous, that is consumable anywhere, and it meets the kind of like new generation's delight cycle expectations. The TikTok generation of I need something every 20 seconds. I think you can meet them where they are. You can meet the expectations of those future players, and you can build something that is inherently kind of surfs upon this wave instead of getting crushed by it. And that to me sounds super exciting, to go and build the next iteration of games, the next genre of games. Well, I think the lens of the challenges we face.
Well, and I think like there's always been, again, I mentioned Red Dead earlier, but they put like a map on an app, and they're like, there we go. Now that's it. Yeah. This is a companion app. And people have thought about that, but it's like always like this like piddly afterthought. It's like, okay, we have extra budget. I guess let's do a companion app, is like what it feels like, versus having something that's maybe integral to the game. To that point, by the way, and to the point of Majestic, have you seen or heard of the movie Brain Scan with Eddie Furlong? No. Okay, so you have to pull it up. It's from 1994. Let me just read the synopsis. A teenager is part of an interactive video game where he kills innocent victims. Later, the murders become real. So, anyways, this Brain Scan, I remember seeing in, when it was out, and it's like 6.1 on IMDb. It's not a well-liked movie, but you should watch it. I think now it actually at what, 30 years old, it would be hilarious. Highly recommend it though, just based on what we just talked about. And I remember when Majestic came out, I was like, oh, this is like Brain Scan. And the movie was like really far ahead of its time, because it starts off, I think, in this kind of like virtual reality type premise. And he's like walking through somebody's kitchen, and he's meant to like murder somebody in their home. And then like he wakes up the next morning late for school, and he's like, oh my gosh, like that was so real in his mind. And I might be making this up, but he has like mud prints by the front door where he's like, wait, was that what was that? And like the whole movie kind of evolves, and I don't actually remember how it ends or any of that other stuff, but I would highly recommend you hunt down I'm sure if you find it's on streaming, let me know, because I'd like to add that to my list as well.
Oh yeah, I will. I will either thank you or shout at you once.
You're gonna love it. I can like it's with how I've set it up and knowing that it's a 6, you might be ranking this a 10.
Yeah, well there you go. You see, under promise, over deliver.
Exactly. Well, and I my memories of it are fond either way. You can't take that from me. Although I might take it for myself if I watch it again. Cool. Well, Dan, thanks so much for the time. I think we could probably spend hours on some of these subjects, and maybe we should, but really appreciate the time today, and look forward to the next one.
Yeah, you too. Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, of course. All right, chat soon. That was Dan Barnes with a terrific conversation about gaming and performance. Don't forget to subscribe to Growth at Scale wherever you get your podcast to get new episodes every week. To learn more about Maven and how we can help drive growth for your company, visit mavan.com, MAVAN.com. I'm Matt Widdoes. Thanks for listening. We'll see you next time.